What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. As we continue on in our position previews for this Packers upcoming offseason, no better time than now to talk about the wide receiver group given Josh Jacobs' comments on Wednesday. But before we do all that, you know what to do. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Follow my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com, including the article version of what we're talking about here today. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app for everything you need Wisconsin sports. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the receiver position, preview the offseason for this group. Just like we did with the running backs, we'll start with an overview, but we're going to focus on a very specific part. Do the Green Bay Packers need a true go-to number one target at the receiver position in this offense? If you ask Josh Jacobs, he says he thinks that's the case. While he sees the potential, like many do, for this current Packers wide receiver room, he adds what they need is a proven number one target for that Packers passing game. And as we saw last year, the receiving group, the Packers passing game as a whole, really struggled against the NFC's best, the Eagles, the Lions, the Vikings. We also saw this group, the passing game as a whole, really struggle during the most important time of the year, right? Those final few games of the season, those final 3 games, including their playoff matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles, often plagued by slow starts, right? The passing game really sputtered early on in those games against big opponents, those games against at the end of the year and into the playoffs. And during those final 3 games against Minnesota, Chicago, and Philadelphia, Jordan Love ranked 28th in completion rate, ranked 31st in yards per pass attempt, had just 1 touchdown pass to 3 interceptions. Now, that's what's going to stand out, right? Jordan Love's the quarterback. He got a big payday. That's what most are going to notice when it comes to the struggles of the Packers passing game. But as Matt LaFleur is often quick to point out, when things are going really well, he says the quarterback oftentimes gets too much of the credit. When things are going really poorly, the quarterback oftentimes gets too much of the blame in those situations. And the Philadelphia game in the playoffs is really a prime example of that. While most of us on the outside saw interceptions being thrown by Jordan Love, here's some examples of what Matt LaFleur saw. So that first interception that Love threw, I believe it was the first one, the one that Darius Slay picked off down the right sideline. Matt LaFleur said that the receiver, and I believe it was Dontavian Wicks, didn't do a good enough job of stacking the defender, getting on top of the defender to create a throwing window for Jordan Love to drop the ball in. Now, in addition to that, it was a really good play by Darius Slay, but that's some of the detail, the nuance of the route that wasn't quite on. And again, the end result was an interception. On another interception, the one by linebacker Zach Bond over the middle of the field, I believe it was Malik Heath running that route. Matt LaFleur said that Malik Heath ran it at 15 yards. He was supposed to run it at 20 yards. That's a big difference. That changes the whole dynamic of where Jordan Love's going with the ball, the throwing lane, all of that. And again, it ended in an interception. So those are just 2 examples, right? It's a long NFL season between the 17 regular season games, the wild card round, 18 games were played, tons of offensive plays were ran. Those are just 2 examples, right? But they were 2 examples, 2 big examples, 2 critical examples in a really big game, right? The playoffs, win or go home. And it feels like, at least during those final 3 games of the year, but I'm gonna guess to a degree, was a microcosm of the issues that the offense experienced throughout the season, because it wasn't just those 2 plays that resulted in interceptions. Another example, drops. Drops were a huge issue for the Packers receivers last season. In terms of total drops, they had the 3rd most in football. It wasn't only Dontavian Wicks who was contributing to those problems. I believe by Pro Football Focus's metrics, Jaden Reed actually had more drops than what Wicks did. In terms of drop rate, the Packers ranked second most in drop rate last season. And then going back to that Minnesota game in Week 17 afterwards, Matt LaFleur talked about how against a man coverage-heavy Minnesota Vikings defense, the receivers just did not win their one-on-one matchups often enough, quick enough. And then again, the detail on the route. So those 2 examples from the Eagles game, I think are really important, right? They provide context around the end result that we're seeing. But like I said, I don't think all of a sudden, just out of nowhere in that game, those were issues that popped up, right? The drops, the details on the routes. There's others examples throughout the season that show the struggles that the Packers passing game offense has had as a whole. And at times that starts with the receiver room. Now, with all that said, in no way am I saying that the ups and downs, the struggles that we saw from the Packers passing game are only due to the receiver position. When you have these types of struggles, right, this continuous slow starts, you can't get over the issues that continue to plague you, that's on everyone. Jordan Love has to be better. Matt LaFleur has to be better. Josh Jacobs can't fumble the ball. The offensive line has to be better. So I just want to be clear on that while we're focusing on the receivers, because obviously that's the position group we're talking about. We're talking about do they need a true number one? Because that's the conversation that Josh Jacobs brought up. It's on everyone, right? In order for this Packers offense to find that consistency, to be a steady presence, to have a steady presence in the passing game, everybody has to be better. Now, something that this receiver room, this Packers passing game does have going for it is the strength in numbers. It's not just that there are 4 or 5 good, solid receivers on this Packers team. They have 4 or 5 good, solid receivers, and each of them brings a different, unique skill set to the table. So if you're Matt LaFleur, you have to absolutely love that, right? Because from a game planning perspective, or as specific situations arise over the course of the game, you have an answer to that. You can see what the opponent does well, maybe an area of weakness that you want to exploit, and you likely have that skill set at the receiver position that you can rely on more heavily in those games, in those specific situations, because the Packers do have, again, a variety of skill sets at that receiver position. And in addition to that, what also helps leverage that element, those traits that the Packers have, is Jordan Love's willingness to spread the football around. It really doesn't matter the situation, right? It can be a high leverage situation like a red zone opportunity, and we might see Malik Heath get the ball over Jaden Reed or over Romeo Doubs. Love goes with the football where the play dictates, where the read dictates, what the defense is doing. And again, there's value in that, because if you're a defense, even in a high leverage situation, you can't necessarily hone in on one specific player or one specific part of the field, because Jordan Love might go to any one of his receivers. He might go to a tight end or running back as well. He might go to any part of the field regardless of the situation. So now you have to account for that. If you're a defense, you have to account for these variety of skill sets and the versatility within those skill sets and how they're utilized, and just the multiplicity of the Packers offense. So again, if you're a defense, there's a bit of on your heels that comes with that, because you have to be ready for so much. And with that, you have to defend the entire field. Again, you can't focus in on one specific part of the field, one specific player. Again, you have players who can attack you in a variety of different ways, so you have to be ready for a lot of different things to come your way. That spreads you out. That provides more spacing for the offense to exploit. So I do believe that is very much an advantage that this Packers offense has with the construction of their current wide receiver room. Now, the question that Green Bay, Gutekunst, LaFleur have to answer this offseason, it's what we're discussing here today, is in those critical situations, right? It's 3rd and 4, you're in the red zone, or you're going up against a Vikings team in week 17 that's just playing a ton of man coverage, and you need someone to go out there and just win their matchup, win their route consistently. The Packers, do they need someone who can elevate above the rest and be that player? Now, Gutekunst said it at a season-ending press conference, and we've heard this before. Packers believe they have those guys, right? They believe they have multiple players at the receiver position who can be that player just described on the offensive side of the ball. Now, we need to see it. And we hear, like I said, we've heard this before. We hear a lot about the potential for a number of these players to be able to transform into that true number one target. But guys have to have the opportunities to do that. And like I said earlier, the struggles in the passing game are not only on the wide receiver position, it's on everyone. And for this part of the conversation, we're going to focus on Matt LaFleur. We just talked about the versatility, right? How great that can be, how beneficial that can be for Matt LaFleur as he's putting game plans together, right? He can get hyper specific based on the opponent in terms of who he wants to feature in the passing game based on the game plan, the situation at hand. Again, because he has a variety of players he trusts, he has a variety of different skill sets that he can lean on. But does that slow the learning curve? Does that elongate the learning process that these young players are going through? Because each week, someone new is featured in the offense. Someone new is getting those opportunities in those more higher leverage situations, again, based on what the opponent's doing, what the matchup dictates. And this is something Matt LaFleur talks about a lot, because you ask him questions about the receiver position and specific opponents, and a lot of times he falls back to, it just depends on who we're playing. And that gives us some insight into, again, and we see it throughout the course of the season, how the game plans are put together. So I feel like, and this is just, again, this is my question. I don't have the answer to this, but does that versatility, to a degree, slow the growth of one of those players becoming a true number one, taking that next step and elevating their game in those key moments, because they're not getting enough opportunities, consistent opportunities, to be able to do that throughout the course of the season, because each week the game plan is so different, because it is so matchup specific, and because the Packers do have a buffet of skill sets to choose from as Matt LaFleur puts that game plan together. So as that, again, that versatility can be great, but with that, there's fewer targets, right? There's fewer opportunities in those critical moments. It's one thing to make a big catch on 1st and 10 in the, with 7 minutes left in the first quarter. It's another thing to do it with 2 minutes left in the game. You need this first down or you lose, right? Those moments, the catch might be the same. It could be the same exact route, same exact place, same exact down and distance, but the magnitude of coming up with those plays, winning your route in the fourth quarter versus the first quarter, are completely different. And that is something that, like anything, has to be learned, right? You need opportunities in those moments to go out there and hopefully succeed. But if you do fail, hopefully it's a learning opportunity for you. So when in that situation again, you're better off for it. And so I do wonder, and again, I don't know if this is the answer. I don't know if I'm going down a wild path here, but I just wonder if that versatility that this Packers team relies on so heavily, and again, ton of value with it. They've had a lot of success with it. But does that take away from one of these players? And I don't know who it would be, but does it take away from one of them, again, elevating above the rest, because those opportunities and those high leverage moments just aren't there? I mean, we can even look at the targets that the Packers receivers have. Dontavian Wicks led the team in targets this year with 80. That ranked 50th among receivers in the NFL. So the Packers' top wide receiver in terms of opportunities is 50th in the NFL. That's a bottom wide receiver 2, just from a pure numbers perspective in terms of targets that they're getting. So again, does that elongate the learning curve, right? Because there's just less opportunities that are consistently there for these group. And then when you factor in, again, those key moments, those opportunities are even fewer as well, because it is so much matchup based, matchup specific. And last thing I'll say in this, and this is something Gutekunst said during his press conference at the end of the season that stuck with me. He goes, and talking about the receivers, he goes, nobody established their own roles. And again, versatility, extremely valuable. It's great. It can be a tremendous asset for an offense, and it is for the Packers. I'm not saying that it's not. But there's value as well in having a defined role. This is what I do. This is what I'm going to focus on. These are the situations I'm going to be a master at, and going out there and excelling in that capacity. So again, my question, I don't have the answer, but I do wonder, do the Packers need more of that? So as Gutekunst said, the time right now So as Gutekunst said in his press conference, the time to compete for championships is now. And in theory, for all the reasons we mentioned, the depth, the versatility that the Packers have at the receiver position, it's great. Having a number of guys that they do believe can turn into go-to guys, number one guys in an offense, that's great. But as we saw in 2024, development is still very much needed. That step forward that I think many of us thought were going to happen in year 2 after what we saw, especially late in the season, 2023, for the most part didn't happen. And again, I don't want to take away because there was growth, right? But it wasn't consistent enough. It wasn't a big enough step forward to help this team be in a better position when it comes to competing for a Super Bowl. And as Gutekunst also said, the urgency with this Packers team needs to be up. And I think how that, and this is my opinion obviously, but how that applies to the receiver position is the details, what you're doing on a daily basis at practice, in the film room, in the meeting room. So you're not dropping passes. So you're running routes where you're supposed to. What are you doing to put yourself in a better position to win those one-on-one matchups that you weren't necessarily able to take advantage of in 2024? And again, the Packers are at a crossroads, it feels like, when it comes to this receiver position. They can continue on the path that they're on, where there's patience and they're banking on one or two of their current receivers, again, really taking a step forward. Because again, that's what's needed, just one or two. It's not, you're not asking all 5 of these guys to take massive steps, but if you have one elevate and become the guy, and then you have the group that the Packers have behind him, that turns into a very, very strong wide receiver group. So do the Packers continue on this path, expecting, banking on, hoping on, whatever it might be, that one of those guys does that this upcoming season? Or do the Packers go out and make an addition, whether it's a draft, whether it's free agency? Do they go out and force the hand a little bit and say, nope, we're going to bring in someone who we know can go out and do these things? And I think an important thing to keep in mind with all of this is whatever the Packers see in this receiver room, again, if there is the thought that one of these guys can elevate and become a true number one, is that a belief because of what you've seen on film, what you've seen behind the scenes, or is that what you're banking on? Is that a hope? Because hope's not a plan, right? That's not a plan. It's a hope. You hope something turns out, but what if it doesn't? So what's the contingency plan? Again, what path are the Packers going to go down? It feels like they're very much at a crossroads at the receiver position this offseason in terms of how they're going to approach it, what their plan is with that group going into 2025. Do you stick with what you're doing, or do you do something different? Now, last part of these position previews that I've been doing is trying to assess what the level of need is this offseason. What's the level of need to go out there and say, all right, we have to get someone in free agency, or we have to get someone in the draft at this specific position. And perhaps when it comes to the receiver room, you're going to get a different answer depending on who you ask. Because like I said, there's a path right now. Like if the Packers necessarily could stick with the group that they have, or they could go out and try to find someone to be that top target in that room. And to a degree, that's the tricky part here, right? Because I don't necessarily think that going out and adding a mid-level or even higher-end receiver, I don't know if that helps this receiver room. The Packers need a top option. They need a Devontae Adams, T. Higgins type free agent addition, or they need to use a first-round pick on one of the top receivers in this draft class, because that's what they need. They don't need another good, solid, wide receiver 2, 3, 4. They have those guys, right? So this is very much, to me, to a degree, a bit of an all or nothing position that they can address. Either you go all in, like I said, and you're spending top free agent dollars to get that guy, or you're spending a first round pick to get that guy to come in and make that high impact right away, or you're probably sticking with the group you have. Because like I said, you don't need another wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. You got a lot of those guys on the roster. So that's the Packers are going to have to thread the needle a little bit again if they're going to go down that path and add to the receiver room. Now, I will say, beyond the wide receiver 1 talk, where the Packers could add, like skill set wise, to this room is that vertical downfield presence with Christian Watson sideline. I think there are reports, rumors right now is that he's going to be out till at least November. And without Watson, the Packers do not have that vertical downfield presence in their offense. I know Bo Melton has speed, but he doesn't have the size Christian Watson does, again, to bring that true vertical presence to the passing game. And without that presence, things get a lot more difficult for an offense, just generally speaking, when it comes to moving the ball. If a defense doesn't respect your downfield ability, your ability to stretch the field vertically, they're going to start creeping up. The safeties, the linebackers, everyone's going to start playing closer to the line of scrimmage. Now, moving the ball on those short, intermediate, over the middle routes becomes a lot more difficult because there's more defenders in a confined space. Even can have an impact on the run game. There's more defenders closer to the line of scrimmage. Getting those big runs, right? 8, 10, 12, 15 yards becomes more challenging because there's more defenders near the line of scrimmage. On the flip side, you have that downfield element. It spreads the defense out. They're worried about getting beat over the top. They want to take away the big play. The safeties drop back. There's less defenders in the box. There's more room to operate over the middle, those short to intermediate routes. Other opportunities within the passing game open up. So right now, with Christian Watson sideline, the Packers, they need that element. And that's not necessarily a skill set that you have to get in the first round or even the second round. You can find late day 2, early day 3 receiver in the draft who can come in and provide you with that presence. The big thing is for defenses to respect that ability within your offense. So I would say the Packers need right now is twofold at the receiver position. Even if they decide, you know what, we believe that Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, whoever it might be, can be that wide receiver one, they still have to go out and find this vertical presence this offseason. They absolutely have to make sure that that is something defenses are thinking about when playing this Packers team until Christian Watson does return. Now, if the Packers say, all right, we need a true number one, they're going to have to go out and, in my opinion, anyways, they're going to have to go out and spend the money, spend the draft capital to get that player. Like I said, bringing in a third-round pick, maybe even a second-round pick, or spending, middle, upper middle, free agent salary cap dollars on the position, I don't know if that gets the job done. You have wide receiver 2s, you had wide receiver 3s on this team. You need a 1. So that's how I see this position and the need of it breaking down this offseason for Green Bay. So there you have it, my friends. As always, I do appreciate you tuning in. And if you've come this far, you might as well hit like. You might as well hit subscribe on the channel. Like I said, I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com, including the article version of what we discussed here today and every day on this channel. And my Wisconsin Sports Radio fan, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. So until next time, friends, take care.